Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my set review for Phyrexia. All will be one, and we are moving into the red cards here. And without any further ado, I think we'll just get started here and start off with this Cacophony Scamp here. We have a 1 mana Phyrexian Goblin Warrior. It is a 1/1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it if you do proliferate. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. That's quite nice. I think... So as I mentioned in a previous video, we're not seeing +1/+1 counters in this set. We're only seeing the oil counters. So there's not going to be any ways to like permanently buff this thing. It's kind of nice with like tricks and stuff, because it's sort of a, you know, bad if you block, bad if you don't type of deal, where you can drop a trick on this thing, and if they block it and trade, this then shoots down one of their other creatures. And if they don't block it, you have the option to sacrifice this and kill their biggest thing anyway, provided you played a trick on it, right? So it's quite nice in that respect. Now, there aren't any counters to like bump this up permanently, like I said, so I'm not sure. I think you're going to have to be pretty heavy into an aggressive strategy and playing those combat tricks for this to be really good. The proliferate's also kind of nice, I think, but because it does seem to be sort of a theme in this color to have stuff that wants oil counters on it. So, a nice little 1-drop. Next up, we have Churning Reservoir. This is a 1 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on another target non-token artifact or creature you control. Pay 2, tap, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Activate only if an oil counter was removed from a permanent you controlled this turn, or a permanent with an oil counter on it was put into a graveyard this turn. Okay. So this is a like an oil counter thing. This can put oil counters on your stuff that's like... And I don't know if I've gone over any of this in the other colors yet, but I've definitely seen it in the set. And that is pseudo-fading or vanishing. I forget which one it is that where it starts with a number of counters on it, and then it removes a counter every turn. So this is a way to keep those things around and make a bunch of tokens. So that's quite nice. Also, it can just like grow some of your stuff. I like this card. Like, this is just dumping out tokens. That seems pretty good to me. And as long as you have something that like, and even like you could just like sacrifice, you could just put an oil counter on one of these little goblin tokens and sacrifice it. Hey, you fulfilled the criteria to make another goblin token. It's probably not coming down and making one immediately. You're going to have to work to get this to be enabled, but I think it's probably going to be reasonably easy to do. So that's very nice for like a sacrifice deck or something like that. Next up, we have Exuberant Fuseling. This is a 1 mana, 0/1 Phyrexian Goblin Warrior with Trample, and it gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it. Exuberant Fuseling enters the battlefield, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Exuberant Fuseling. So it enters the battlefield as a 1/1. And then pays off for sacrifice. So like if you have these two together, the Churning Reservoir and the Exuberant Fuseling, this thing's gonna get out of control. Like, it's just gonna... So I think your opponents are gonna want to trade for this very, very quickly. But if they're not able to, this is great. Next up, we have a Free From Flesh. This is a 1 mana red instant. Well, obviously it's red. We're in red. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put 2 oil counters on it. Okay. So this starting set of cards has really seemed to play into a very strong theme. Put oil counters on stuff. Remove oil counters from stuff. Be very aggressive. So for example here, if you have an exuberant Fuseling and you play a Free From Flesh on it, that's a +4/+2 on the Fuseling. So that's quite a nice trick. If you have a couple of creatures like this Fuseling, things that get big when they have oil counters on them, then this is a very, very solid card. It's crazy with the blue flyer we saw. That was because that's actually, so it's that triggered on instants of sorceries, I think. So that's +1 from the cast, +2/+2 until end of turn from the spell, and then 2 oil counters, so +5/+5 on that thing. That's crazy good. Now, that is 1 creature in the set. I don't remember. I think that was probably an uncommon as well, the creature, but I could be wrong. That's a huge buff for 1 mana. Like, that's absolutely nuts. Yeah. Not much else to say about that. I think this card is going to be very good in Limited. I think this is going to be surprisingly good because those oil counters are actually going to matter a lot. Next up, we have Gleeful Demolition. 1 mana sorcery. Destroy target artifact. If you controlled that artifact, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian goblin creature tokens. This is almost a reprint, isn't it? How was it? It was Coldotha Rebirth. I think that was maybe like Sacrifice an Artifact or something like that. So this is a little bit, this is more flexible. It's like a modal spell. But you made 3 red goblins for 1 red mana if you sacrificed an artifact. I think that was it. So this is 1 red mana, destroy an artifact. If you controlled it, create 3 1/1 red Phyrexian goblin creature tokens. So there's a little bit of a drawback if you're trying to use it for your goblins, in that your opponent could like remove the artifact from underneath the demolition, and you don't get 1/1s, but that's probably worth it for the flex of being able to deal with an opponent's powerful artifact. I think this is a very good card. Like, I almost think like red black sacrifice decks and constructed could make use of this. Like Oni Cult Anvil decks. Unfortunately, these goblins are not artifacts. The goblins it makes are not artifacts. Though they look like it in the art, they are not actually artifacts. It's a nice little callback. Kind of wish that in a case like this, they didn't just make a sort of better version of an existing card, but I think that's sort of a thing we're gonna have to get used to going forward. Is that's what they're going to do. Next up, we have Hexgold Slash. This is 1 red mana instant. Hexgold Slash deals 2 damage to the target creature. If that creature has Toxic, it deals 4 damage to that creature instead. Okay, so this is a shock against anything that doesn't have Toxic, and against anything with Toxic, it is a Flame Slash. This is probably pretty solid. There's a fair number of toxic creatures and a lot of little stuff that we've seen thus far, so this is probably a pretty solid card. You know, it's another one of these 2 or 4. It can't go face, which is a drawback, particularly in an aggressive set. You kind of want that ability to go and put the last few points of damage over on your opponent's face. But yeah, it seems pretty decent. I think these numbers are important to keep in mind when we're looking at cards. So anything with 3 or more toughness that isn't toxic is going to dodge the slash, and anything with 5 or more toughness that is toxic is going to dodge the slash. Right? And it's important to keep in mind because as we get along here, like damage-based removal, seeing where it lands is really important. So next up, we have Sawblade Scamp. This is a 1 mana, 1/1 Phyrexian beast. It has haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Sawblade Scamp. You can tap, remove an oil counter from it. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. Okay. So this is kind of a little bit of direct damage, like what I was talking about just a second ago. This feels a little slow, though, because you're only ever getting 1 damage a turn out of this. Like, it's not a Thermo Alchemist or one of the other pingers, the 2 mana pingers that hit your opponent every time you play an instant or sorcery spell. So it's certainly damage. It's certainly a piece player in a Spellslinger style deck in Limited, but I don't think it's going beyond that. I think that's about it. Next up, we have a Vindictive Flamestoker. This is a 1 mana, 1/2 Phyrexian wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. Okay. Pay 7 and sacrifice it. Discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each oil counter on it. Okay. Another oil counter thing that's going to be wonderful to put oil counters on. I don't know that you necessarily want to sink them all in here, but it's pretty solid. That ability, the activated ability, is very strong. Just letting you reload in the late game with an aggressive red deck. The thing I think we're probably going to run into here is there's not a lot of direct damage to opponents. So that's sort of the question there. It is a wizard, so in some of the more recent constructed formats like Pioneer, there might be an Is It Wizards deck that might want this card. Just put a couple put a bunch of oil counters on there and blast your opponent away. In sort of an almost Bowman courier style, but not attacking, obviously. Just that ability is reminiscent of the courier to me. But yeah. Next up, we're moving into 2-drops. We have Axiom Engraver. This is a 2-mana, 1/3 Phyrexian wizard. Enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Tap, remove an oil counter from it. Rummage. That is, for those of you who don't play too much Magic, discard a card, draw a card. Important to note here, the discard is part of the cost, so if you were to copy this ability, you would just draw 2 cards. Probably not relevant anywhere. I don't think there's anything that copies abilities in this... copies activated abilities in this set. But it's something interesting. Obviously, like looters, rummagers, these kinds of cards are very, very strong and limited. This is a fixed number of uses, like, well, not fixed because you can always proliferate, but it is a very small number of uses, so it's worth keeping in mind. I don't think that that's going to stop it from being good in limited. I think this is still going to be a good card. Like, just a solid anti-aggro stat line at 1/3, and then generating pseudo card advantage by turning your dead cards into live ones. Like I said earlier, you know, the difference between like this being a 1/3 or a like a 2/2. 1/3 means that the Hexgold Slash can't just blow this away. So that's kind of important. Next up, we have Barbed Battle Fist. This is a 2-mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin. Equipped creature gets +1/-1, equip of 1. So that's a reasonable equip cost. The equip effect is pretty poor, but effectively this is a 2-mana 3/1 that is an equipment, right? More or less. It's not actually an equipment, but it is gonna be how it plays. This is a 2-mana 3/1. Is that worth it with equipment synergies? I don't think so. I don't think that this is going to be an effective card. Like, all the equipment thus far have seemed just really bad. Because they are not effective unless you have equipment synergies. Like, you need the other cards to make them good, whereas, like, the other cards that we've seen, you know, some of them have just been are just decent cards in their own right, and then they play into, you know, oil counters or something. So yeah, that's sort of where I fall on these so far. Like, the equipment synergies have seemed fantastic, but the synergy, the things that you have to play to get there are just not good. So, moving on. We have Blazing Crescendo. This is a 2-mana instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So this is like a new impulse draw and a trick. I think this card is probably very good. Um, because you get until the end of your next turn to play the card. Uh, it's effectively a card draw, right? Because you will get the opportunity to play that card with a full untap, right? Where some previous impulse style draw effects have not allowed that. So, and then like the trick is solid as well. Yeah, I think this card is very good in limited and potentially, well, probably not. But you could play this in like Boros Heroic and not be super upset about it just because you get that extra. It is another quote unquote cantrip in your deck. So yeah, I think this is pretty good, pretty solid. Next up, we have Hexgold Halberd. This is a 2-mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin. As long as it's your turn, equipped creature has first strike and trample. Again, and then again, this prohibitive equip cost. Mediocre effect. First strike and trample is pretty good, but if I'm going to be paying 3 mana on top of my creature, I kind of want to be getting a little bit more. Like first strike and trample is definitely solid, but I'd be looking for a little bit more, particularly with that prohibitive equip cost, because if my stuff gets shot out from under the equip, then I'm getting basically time locked. This is going to take a majority of your turn. Now, as a 2-mana 2/2 with first strike and trample, it's decent. Not great, but decent. Notably, only on your turn, so not defensive first strike, which would make this very good. Next up, we have Nahiri's Sacrifice. This is a 2-mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature with mana value X. Nahiri's Sacrifice deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. This card, I think, is a tale of two worlds. This is like Fling, but it's based on mana value instead of power. And why do I say it's a tale of two worlds? I think in this limited format, this is not going to do a ton. You know, we've got a more aggressive slant, it seems, to this format, so you're going to be playing more lean, low to the ground. It doesn't scale with like tricks or anything. You can't like pump a ton of power onto something and then fling it or sacrifice it to this and blast away. Conversely, however, in Constructed, where there are ways to abuse or cheat the mana curve like a lot, this card I could see being pretty impactful. I'm not sure what format's Affinity is playable in, but I'm thinking about like playing the 7-mana Thopter thing that draws you 2 cards and then sacking it to this and blowing up your opponent's board with a just blazing away everything. Now maybe that's Magical Christmas Land, right? But that feels like a very natural home for this card. Someplace where you can really deep get some deep discounts on your artifacts and or creatures. And then chuck them with this. But like I said, in this limited format, like, everything's very small, and don't sack your tokens to this thinking it's going to be a fling or fling-like. It's not. You sack a token to this, you just do no damage. Sorry. Next up, we have the Red Sun's Twilight. This is the red card of the Twilight cycle. It is X red sorcery. Destroy up to X target artifacts. If X is 5 or more, for each artifact destroyed this way, create a token that's a copy of it. Those tokens gain haste. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. This card's solid. We've seen a fair number of artifacts in this set, and this is actually a payoff for the equipment deck that is kind of funny. Because your equipment are doing so little, like this Barbed Batterfist or Hexgold Halberd, you can just, as long as you can do this for 5 or more, you can just you can blow up all your little equipments and get the tokens, because the tokens stick around. That's probably a little cute, because that is a lot of mana to sink into this. That's 7 to sink into this. As just a Biforce style effect, this is probably solid. Yeah. Just killing a bunch of artifacts. It's pretty nice. Excuse me. Next up, we have Shrapnel Slinger. This is a 2 mana, 2/2 artifact creature, Phyrexian Beast. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. When you do, destroy target artifact an opponent controls. I think this is quite solid. Sack a Might or something, blow up an actual card. That's pretty cool. We have some other stuff like this goblin or whatever. And this is an artifact set. May not, like, super, well, no, it probably super looks like it, but, you know, it is an artifact set, so destroying an artifact, probably relevant in a fair number of games. I wouldn't be, like, running too many of these, but having, like, a 1 or 2 in a limited deck would be nice. Probably closer to just 1. Next up, we have Thrill of Possibility. This is actually a reprint. We have, it's 1 in a red, instant, as an initial cost to cast a spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. Solid card, not much else to say. Next up, we are stepping into the 3 drops. This is Bladegraft Aspirant. This is a 3 mana, 2/3 Phyrexian Warrior. It has Menace. The equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And activated abilities of equipment you control that target Bladegraft Aspirant cost 1 less to activate. Importantly, this is a common. So you can probably reliably get 2 of these. Maybe 3. Reliably get 2. Maybe but yeah. And at that point, you're a 1 mana discount on the actual casting of the equipment, I think, is more impactful than the 1 mana discount on the equip cost, because that's only if you're targeting this with them, with the equips. So yeah, but a 1 mana 3/1 like a Barbed Batterfist or Hexgold Halberd being a 1 mana 2/2 first strike trample is very nice. That's quite good. I don't know if it's gonna be enough to tip the scales though. I think that's a tough one. A tough one to sell me on. It almost feels like the equip costs were written with this in mind. Saying, oh, but what if they have a Bladegraft aspirant that they want to slap this on immediately? Well, it should cost X to put this on there, so let's make it cost one more than that. Probably not what happened, but that's what it feels like. Next up, I don't really have much else to say on Bladegraft aspirant. Yeah. Next up, we have Forge Hammer Centurion. This is a 3 mana 3/2 Phyrexian warrior. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. When it attacks, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. When you do, target creature can't block this turn. I don't like it. You gotta get 2 oil counters on this thing before it actually does anything. And that means 2 things have to die, or you have to specifically put them on there in another way. Like, you have to spend your trick or at sorcery speed too, because yeah, I don't like this card. I think it's a little weak. If it entered with 2 on there, or even if it entered with 1 on there, like, it'd be much better, but it doesn't, so it is what it is. Don't like it. It's kind of just a 3/2. Next up, we have Furnace Punisher. This is a 3 mana 3/3 Phyrexian warrior with Menace, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Furnace Punisher deals 2 damage to that player unless they control 2 or more basic lands. This card doesn't matter. I mean, in Limited, it is a 3 mana 3/3 with Menace. You're gonna have basics by turn 3, or 2 more basics. You should by turn 3. There are some lands in this set, but the second part of this thing's text is essentially flavor text, and then in other formats, 3 mana is just too prohibitive for this effect to be timely and meaningful. So that's that. Next up, we have Coldotha Cackler. This is a 3 mana 2/3 Phyrexian hyena with trample. Whenever it attacks, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. Well, there's another thing that plays into the oil counter aggro build. I like this card. I can see it being pretty easy to get this thing to be you know, a 4/3 or even a 5/3 trampler. And that's pretty quick to be attacking. So, pretty big to be attacking pretty quickly, is what I should say. I like it. It's a nice dog. Well, not a dog, hyena, but... Well, who can really say what it is at this point? It's been Phyrexia so much. Next up, we have Magmatic Sprinter. This is a 3-mana, 3/2 Phyrexian warrior with haste. When my Magmatic Sprinter enters the battlefield, put 2 oil counters on target artifact or creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, return Magmatic Sprinter to its owner's hand unless you remove 2 oil counters from it. This is a neat card. I like this card a lot. So you can play this and either put 2 oil counters on it, or put 2 oil counters on something else. Let's say you have one of these fuselings, one of the exuberant fuselings. You play your Magmatic Sprinter on turn 3. You give that +2/+0, and and you swing with both of them, and this thing's coming back to your hand, and you can play it again next turn. That seems very nice. Just being able to put a couple oil counters on stuff, and then, like, if you want to have it stick around and, you know, make a different play next turn, you can just put the oil counters on it and have it stick for a turn. Typically, you'll probably be, like, going for the final hit the turn after, but you could also just have a big play. Next up, we have Rebel Salvo. This is a 3-mana instant. Affinity for equipment. Okay. Rebel Salvo deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. That permanent loses indestructible until end of turn. Holy crap. Wow, that is a... Wow. Okay, so that is a reason to play equipment. You know, I mean, you don't even have to play equipment for that to be ridiculous. Yeah, that card's that's just ridiculous. In limited, that is insane. That's 3 mana, deal 5. That's a... And then if you have any equipment at all, that's insane. They misprinted. They must have made some sort of mistake there. Like, that should be a 4, not a 2. Not a 2. Like, 1 equipment on the battlefield, and this is just, like, blasting away your opponent's stuff for effectively nothing. That is a very powerful red removal spell. Yeah, that's very good. I'm a picking at, like, all the time. Because you don't even need the equipment for this to be good. And that's what kills me, is, like, it's not bad at 3 mana regardless, and then you have an equipment, it's 2, and you have 2 equipment, it's all of a sudden it's just 1 red mana to just blow away whatever your opponent has. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Next up, we have a Rook Hexgold Nabber. This is a 3 mana, 2/2, trample and haste. Whenever an equipped creature you control other than Rook Hexgold Nabber attacks or dies, you may attach all equipment attached to that creature to Rook. Interesting. So let me just throw all my equipped creatures into your stuff in order to Tron up the biggest 2/2 goblin ever seen. Yeah, another equipment like payoff. I could see it. Yeah, it's just it's not. It's not really getting there for me. Because you're going to be throwing your other creatures away if you're using their attacks to throw all their equipment on Rook, uh, and then the equipment we've seen thus far isn't gonna make this go crazy. It'll make it a little bigger, but it's not gonna make it. It's not gonna like take it to the moon or anything. So, it's not really getting there for me. Next up, we have Slowbad Iron Goblin. This is a 3 mana, 3/3 legendary creature, Phyrexian Goblin Artificer. That is a long type line. It has tap, sacrifice an artifact, add an amount of red mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. This is an interesting, like, commander card. It's a 3/3 unlimited and can, I suppose, ramp you to your top end if you're sacrificing some artifact garbage that you have lying around. It seems alright. Yeah, it seems alright. No, 3 mana, 3/3 is nothing to sneeze at, but that activated ability is not going crazy anywhere, I don't think. Like a 3 mana card with no haste in constructed is a little slow. Little slow. And the ability is not is only generating mana advantage, so you can get some power out of that, but probably commander playable. People will play that in commander, but that's about it. Next up, we have Urbrask's Forge. This is a 3 mana artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put an oil counter on Urbrask's Forge. Then create an X1 for Red Phyrexian Horror creature token with Trample and Haste, where X is the number of oil counters on Urbrask's Forge. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, so you make a little ball lightning every turn. It's nice that it's a sacrifice at end of turn. Little ball lightning every turn. And it triggers at the beginning of combat, so you will get a 1/1 on the first turn this comes down. Another nice little combination with the Magmatic Sprinter, right? Like you play the Sprinter, put 2 oil counters on this, go from like a 1/1 to a 4/1 in one turn. That's nice. I think this is quite powerful if your game is going long enough, right? It's going to put constant pressure on your opponent to deal with this ball lightning every turn. That said, we have seen like artifact destruction, a couple of artifact destruction things, and I think like Shrapnel Slinger is common, so your opponent can pretty easily just have artifact removal. So this is maybe a little questionable to run in the face of that, but you could have other artifact threats, so critical mass overload their removal. It could get there, and it's definitely a lot of pressure in the long run, right? So I would say you probably want to put more oil counters on this. You probably want to be focusing on proliferate and stuff if you're running it. Next up, we have a Volt Charge. This is a 3 mana instant. Volt Charge deals 3 damage to any target to proliferate. Okay, so I can either do 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker with a Rebel Salvo, for 3 or less, maybe, or 3 damage to anything. I mean, uncommon versus common, but still. And the proliferate's also not nothing. I think this card is alright. I don't think it's good. I think you need to be, again, if you're taking this card, you're definitely looking for that proliferate to do something. Yeah. Next up, we have Awaken the Sleeper. This is a 4 mana sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, gets haste until end of turn. If it's equipped, you may destroy all equipment attached to that creature. Okay, I get the flavor here. There is like a sacrifice theme in red and potentially some other colors. You know, it's a threaten effect. It's if you can turn this into an actual like 2-for-1, or well, not 2-for-1, actual 1-for-1, like an actual exchange. It's pretty good. If you can't, it's not. Yeah. Next up, we have Chimney Rabble. It's also worth noting that the timing of the equipment destruction is pretty poor, because the equipment destruction happens immediately when you gain control of the thing. So you don't get to swing with the pumped up creature first. So if you steal one of their Farmiridin things, you get to swing with a 2/2. Which isn't, like, super threatening. But you get to blow up their equipment. Yeah. So next we have Chimney Rabble. This is a 4 mana, 3/3, Phyrexian Goblin Warrior with haste. And whenever it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Okay. That's nice. It comes with its sacrifice fodder. So that's nice. Not great. Decent. I don't even know about that. That's probably not very good. Next up, we have Hazardous Blast. This is a 4 mana sorcery. Hazardous Blast deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. I remember a version of this card that did 3 target creatures or something like that, and those creatures couldn't block, and it was not very good. I think with all the mites running around, this might be a solid card in this format. I think time will tell. We've seen there are quite a few X1s in the format as well. We've got the Goblin tokens out of red. We have the mites out of white. We have a fair number of small creatures in blue and black. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's decent. We'll see. Next up, we have Koth, Fire of Resistance. This is a 4 mana legendary planeswalker. It enters with 4 loyalty. It has the following abilities. +2. Search your library for a basic mountain card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. -3. Deals damage equal to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. -7. You get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters a battlefield under your control. This emblem deals 4 damage to any target. This card is, in my opinion, bad. it's only going to be even remotely effective in a mono red deck. The +2, I mean, it gets a mountain. That's fine. Like, this is very similar. This is sort of a callback in some ways to that one Liliana, that goes and gets a swamp every turn. But I think the negative ability is on this is worse. Mono red is traditionally not trying to play any sort of control game, so this is a slow control planeswalker in a typically not very slow control color. And the emblem, it's a Valakut plus, but like at that point you've upticked it twice, so you're on turn 7. No, turn 6. Yeah, you're on turn 6 at a minimum. Caveats aside. You gonna go get that many more mountains, and like this will do maybe 4 damage. The emblem. You're gonna be like, oh, but scape shift. If you're gonna scape shift, just get a Valakut, right? Just go ahead and get the Valakut. And I know that's sort of a straw man thing that I'm doing there, but you have to think about the situations in which it's gonna see play and how you would exploit that. And I'm like, I really don't see this doing anything. Yeah. And in limited, like, you're not gonna have the you're probably not going to have the ability to play mono red, so this could be as bad as 4 mana shock, right? Comes down, you've only got the 2 mountains necessary to play it, and in order to impact the board immediately, it's going to have to downtick. So yeah, I don't really like this card. I think it's pretty poor for a 4 mana planeswalker. Next up, we have Solfim, Mayhem Dominus. This is a 4 mana, 5/4 legendary creature, Phyrexian horror. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. This card is immediately replacing Torbran in so many red decks. It's not even funny. Pay 1, red Phyrexian, discard 2 cards, put an indestructible counter on Solfim. Yeah. Tor who? Yeah, it's not a plus. It's not +2, it's double. But a lot of your stuff you were already in red. You were already trying to do 2 or 3 damage, and at that point, this is just better than Torbran. Like, there's a couple of cards that Torbran does a lot better with than this does, but the vast majority of your stuff, it's equal or better, and easier to cast, and can also just give itself indestructible for some reason. Yeah. Solid card. Very solid card. In limited, if you're running this card, it's going to be very important to hold on to your lands if you haven't drawn it already. Like, it's going to be very important to not overcommit on your lands. right? Pay attention to what's in your deck and only play as many lands as you need to play your top decks, right? And after that, you're going to want to start to hold them because you could draw this and then pitch them to this. Just, yeah. Obviously, like, it is a mythic, so limited considerations are a little bit less, but it's something that you need to keep an eye on your play patterns. Next up, we have Urbrask's Anointer. This is a 4-mana, 4/2 artifact creature, Phyrexian wizard. When Urbrask's Anointer enters the battlefield, deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of permanents you control with oil counters on them. Interesting. I kind of like this card. There's a lot of oil countery stuff. It's probably not going to be better than dealing. It's probably not going to be dealing more than 2. Typically, maybe you can push it to like 3 or 4. But a 4/2 that comes down and shocks something is not bad, right? It's not bad. And maybe you can set it up for more. I like it. Next up, we have Volshock Splitter. This is a 4-mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Equip 3. I'm sorry. Just please. Please. Give me a decent equipment. So this is effectively a 4-mana 4/2 that is an equipment, and that's the upside. We just saw a 4-mana 4/2 that comes in and shocks something potentially. I mean, I guess without anything with oil counters on it, this is effectively pretty similar to the Volshock Splitter, but the Volshock Splitter leaves something behind. But the upside is so much less on the Splitter than the Anointer. The Anointer can deal some damage, pick off some stuff, and really help you turn the corner. This is going to come down and be a big creature, maybe. Maybe make one of your other creatures bigger. That's really not doing it. Yeah, I think that's bad. Next up, we have All Will Be One. This is a 5-mana enchantment. Whenever one or more creature counters would be put on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent, creature opponent controls, or planeswalker opponent controls. Okay, so clearly designed to work with all the oil counter stuff that's going on in here in this set. You know, you do a proliferate, you do a bunch of pings, you have something enter the battlefield with a couple of oil counters on it. It does like a shock. I think 2 is what we're seeing typically there in terms of number of oil counters entering the battlefield, things entering the battlefield with oil counters. 2 or sometimes 3, but mostly 2. I think this is going to be very solid in limit. I mean, I think it's going to be very good in limited, but in construct, I really don't see this seeing a ton of play in constructed. There's some fun things you can do with it for sure. Like, you can definitely have a ton of fun with this card, but the strategies and archetypes that this supports are not going to be spectacular. I don't think. Like, this card is going to be I mean, just think about it this way. Like, this, you in most other formats besides, like, Standard, you could be playing, like, Okay, for example, Sarkhan's healing. Okay, and that's sort of a niche strategy. So I think this is a cool looking card. It's got a lot of like fun potential stuff you could do with it, but I don't think it's going to impact anything really. There are infinites with this, but you're going to have to play a 5 mana enchantment alongside something else. So you could brew up a deck that will work. I don't think it's going to be the most competitive thing in the world. I think it's going to be highly reliant on, for example, in modern like rituals and stuff. To get it to happen very early. Which maybe it's reliable enough, and then you just go infinite and blaze your opponent out of the game. Which is cool, but I don't think it will be reliable enough. And I think the fact that there are well-known infinite combos with this card means that it's actually just a bad idea to play in your like for fun commander decks. If you're one of those players, just this is going to be a bad idea to play because it's going to draw more hate than it's really justified. If you're not running the infinites. So, just one little nod to Commander. It is the title card, so yeah. Next up, we have Dragonwing Glider. This is a 5 mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin. Equipped creature has +2/+2 and flying and haste. Okay. As a card, like playing it on the front face or whatever you want to call it, it's fine. It's a 4/4 flying haste for 5. We've seen this be good. Typically the upside though is a lot better than an equipment that again costs you 5 to equip. Yeah, so it's a little under. It's a bit under par because the haste, particularly because the haste here. This is bulk. The haste here isn't gonna matter because it's such a prohibitively high equip cost. You might as well have just like played anything else to give your thing haste, right? The +2/+2 in flying is nice, and it'll win games because it will be able to put your big stuff over the top and kill your opponent. But this is pretty lackluster for rare. But this is funnily enough, this is about the best equipment we've seen. As far as I'm concerned, like this is one of the better equipment we've seen, and it's still pretty subpar. Yeah. Next up, we have a Furnace Strider. This is a 5 mana 4/5 Phyrexian beast. It enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it, and you can remove an oil counter from it. Target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. Oh look, another way to give my things haste. So this effectively has haste itself. Yes, yeah. So you can play this, remove an oil counter from it, and give itself haste. So this is a 4/5 haste that can give something else haste in the future. You can maybe like proliferate the counters on it and get more haste later. I wouldn't count on it with this thing being 5 mana. I would maybe say this is going to like haste itself up and then haste up one more threat after that, right, on your next turn, and that hopefully closes out the game for you. I'm gonna go back to one card that I talked about earlier, and again point something out here. The Furnace Strider, like, if you have Magmatic Sprinter, you can like Magmatic Sprinter and then play like another 3-drop, put the oil counters on the Strider, and the Strider can give the other thing haste, which is nice. I like that a lot. That's fun. I think this card is quite good. 4/5 is a little smaller than I would like, but I think 4 is enough in this set. I think 4 power is going to be kind of enough in this set. I think a 4/5 is going to be a solid stat line here. Yeah. Next up, we have Molten Rebuke. This is a 5-mana sorcery. Choose one or both. Deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target equipment. Oh my god. We had like something that was truly broken earlier, and then we have this thing here, which is just so fair it's not even funny. 5 mana, deal 5 is like where this effect typically sits. But we saw earlier with the Rebel Salvo that you can get this damage for 3 or less mana. So this is like a if you're desperate for removal card. And destroy target equipment, like I've said, all this equipment is not really doing it for me. Like, none of it's been threatening on its own. The Dragonwing Glider is about as threatening as it gets, and they're going to spend like 5 mana to give something flying and +2/+2. Dangerous, yes, but right, there's other artifact destruction. You can get artifact destruction for 2. Shrapnel Singer. You can get it for less. You can get multiple artifact destruction with Red Sun's Twilight. Red Sun's Twilight is rare, obviously, but like Singer's common. There's other artifact destruction in the set as well. Yeah. That's just, are you desperate for red removal? Here you go. Here's something. Yeah. Next up, we have Resistant Skywarden. This is a 5 mana, 5/5 Ogre Rebel with Menace and Reach. This is a good limited card. This is a good limited card. It's really funny. It's yeah. And it's even got like the heartwarming little quote at the bottom there. Oh my gosh. This card is so good. Menace, very nice for attacking. Reach, very good for defending. 5/5, solid stat line. We haven't seen a ton that gets beyond that. And, like, this is top of the curve for the set, so yeah, this card looks solid. Next up, we have a Capricious Hellraiser. This is a 6 mana that is 3 and triple red. Triple red here for a 4/4 Phyrexian Dragon. Mythic Rare. This spell costs 3 less to cast if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. Flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard. Choose a non-creature, non-land card from among them and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. That's pretty nice. That's pretty nice. Randomness, not great. And also the fact that this thing just runs into a resistance Skyward dies. Oh, my 6 mana mythic dies to your 5 mana uncommon. Huh. And at that point, it's just the ETB? Yeah. That's really funny. Um, that said, like, in constructed, this is going to be something that, like, if you can control the the stuff that's in your graveyard and still be able to play this for the lower mana cost, the triple red cost, this could be quite powerful. Like there's definitely a way to brew and such that you could now 9 cards in your graveyard is a lot of cards in your graveyard. And then it's a graveyard centric combo. That said, you could like I hate to say this. I absolutely hate to say this, but I'm going to bring up a card that is absolutely busted in the current state of the game, and that is this card pairs extremely nicely with Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Okay? Fable and this is great because I mean Fable's an amazing card, but the ETB doesn't care how many cards are in your graveyard. Okay, you could have 2 cards in your graveyard, or even 1 card in your graveyard. The ETB will still trigger. Okay, and it'll just exile, if I understand the rules correctly, it'll just exile all of them and choose one at random to cast. So, or no, you choose which spell it casts, but it'll cast whatever one it wants, or it'll choose at random what to exile. So if there's only 1 card in your graveyard, you get to cast that regardless. So it works really nicely with Fable for a couple of reasons. One, obviously the Goblin ramps you towards this. 2, the looting, you can fill your graveyard up to cast this. And 3, if you are in Magical Christmas Land and have managed to convince your opponent that Fable the Mirror Breaker is not a broken card that they need to deal with immediately, and untap with a Reflections of Kiki Jiki, you end this thing, or just like 4 mana and 9 cards in your graveyard, you can copy this thing and make some crazy stuff happen. So that's very fun. I definitely feel like there's a brew in standard. Granted, I haven't played a lot of standard of late, but there's definitely ways to brew around this card. So this looks like a fun card to play with. Next up, we have Oxida Finisher. This is a 7 mana. Oh boy, that's a big mana cost. 7/5. Okay, that's a big stat line. Ogre Rebel with affinity for equipment and trample. So at 7, if you're playing an equipment deck, you'll probably have 3. Well, actually, it's not. Yeah, at that point, it's not 7. But like, you could probably reliably have like 3 equipment lying around, and then this becomes a 5 mana 7/5 with trample, which is pretty decent. I think the Resistance Skywarden is probably better than this card because it's just got trample. It's not trample and haste. It's not. Now, if you are just running all the equipment creatures because everyone's gonna be passing them, this could get a little redonkulous, but I think the earliest you could possibly play this is turn 4. I mean, obviously not entirely true, but the earliest you could sort of fairly play this is turn 4, right? Turn 1, 1-drop equipment. Turn 2, 2-drop equipment. Turn 3, 3-drop equipment. Turn 4, this is discounted by 3, so it's 4 mana. So yeah, so this thing. And you've just tempoed out all 3 turns without, like, having some ridiculous... Well, what if I drew 4 1-mana equipments? What then? Yeah. I think it's decent. I think if the equipment deck is going around like crazy, because I don't think these equipment look good, then this is definitely a solid card to pick up for that. But that is going to bring us to the end of the red cards, that is mono red cards. There are obviously multicolored cards that I haven't covered yet, and I have also not done green yet. So you will be seeing those, and like I said, those will be out before the set release, so I'll probably be doing, if I haven't already, multiple uploads in a day. So, hope you enjoyed that. If there's anything I missed or any sort of opinions that you have on these new cards, feel free to post them in the comments. You know, obviously I am just one person, so I'm not going to notice everything. I'm not going to notice every single possible combination or setup. So there's definitely some discussion to be had there. So, hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time with the green review. Green cards, mono green cards for Phyrexia. All will be one.